Joining me today, Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Great to have your company today as well. I have to say, I missed some stonkingly good news stories and very lively news stories last week. More of these protests. I'm digging out my England flag. Again, if you're offended by the England flag, I think you're probably living in the wrong country, and I include a lot of homegrown Brits in that, by the way, but also Lucy Connolly's release as well, and that sort of comes up in terms of freedom of speech. And I know Spiked Online and also Free Speech Union, of which you're also a member, same as me, have been very vehement about the right to say things, frankly, which other people don't like. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, especially in relation to the Donald Trump executive order signed yesterday, basically to criminalise, with a year in prison, someone burning or desecrating the US flag, something I'm pretty sure you and I would both think was an outrageous attack on freedom of speech. But we've got to start with Nigel Farage. In about 24 minutes' time, he's going to be standing on stage in Oxfordshire in front of the British media, who's not on holiday, and he's going to basically announce, we've seen, I think the Times newspaper had the exclusive at the weekend, his big plan to tackle illegal migration. And I'm just going to outline it and get your thoughts on it. So, detaining immediately, full stop, detaining and deporting all illegal boat arrivals. A new law basically to make it clear that, at no point if you arrive illegally are you ever going to be allowed to claim asylum. No bail, no right of appeal, off the streets. A statutory duty on the Home Secretary to deport anyone illegal. Detainees being housed on either military bases that are now disused or building new prefab detention centres. Voluntary deportations being offered, a nice little app. You can leave, we'll give you £2,500, flee, fly, off you go, ta-ra, or you will be forced to leave. Doesn't matter if you're from Afghanistan, Iran, Eritrea, wherever you're from, you are going to be out of this country. And as Nigel Farage said, it's what happens to you when you go back? Not our problem. If you can't deport there, Rwanda still an option, Albania an option, even the Ascension Islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Also, talking about 5 charter flights a day. Airlines won't carry them, fine. RAF planes will do it. £10 billion cost for all of that, but he reckons it will save money in the long run. Labour and Tories have already criticised a lot of these figures. Crucial to this also, scrapping the Human Rights Act, leaving the European Court of Human Rights Convention, derogating the Refugee Convention, but also a new British Bill of Rights, basically enshrining our right as to do anything that's not prohibited by law, including freedom of speech. What do you make of that package of measures?
Well, I think he's really thrown down the gauntlet, hasn't he? Immigration is the key issue of British politics right now. You see that if you look at the opinion polls, you see that just in the general kind of atmosphere around politics at the moment, and Farage is continuing to set the weather. If even a few years ago you would have suggested that these kinds of policies would have been firmly on the table and all the other parties would be scrambling to respond, you probably wouldn't have been believed. But I think probably the most important part there is the willingness to leave the European Court of Human Rights, to repeal the Human Rights Act, to suspend various other international conventions that we are party to. Because really at the core of this is control. Can a British Home Office pull a lever and something actually happen, or does it get gunged up in the
you
court?
And your crazy talk. This is post-bank holiday madness.
And that's why I think that's really at the core of these proposals. And I think it's fascinating that in terms of the criticisms, particularly from the Labour Party, but even just the sort of liberal left media in general, is this plan isn't fully costed. It's not.
Neither is the plan to have the entire world, third world young men turn up on our shores and live for free in hotels. I'm not sure that's been costed either.
But they're kind of getting him on the spreadsheet questions rather than the kind of principle. And even
they never get it right.
And even if Labour or those newspapers vehemently disagree with what it is that Farage is proposing, I think they've realised that the public are in a very different place. They want this issue to be dealt with. The old virtue signalling doesn't work. At least
they don't want this issue to be dealt with. What they want to do is like the issue to get migrants out of hotels, put them in houses of multiple occupancy, because then they're sort of dissipated around the community. There's not one big hotel.
No, the public want it dealt with. The politicians now have realised that. That's probably about as far as it goes.
But the politicians don't want to actually deal with it because they don't want to grip hold of it at all, do they? But it's interesting you say it's the number one concern. There was the usual sort of, bleeding heart human rights, refugee representative on the Radio 4's Today programme this morning, and they were saying, look, this is kind of stirred up by some of the argument was this is stirred up by the media, and actually people's concerns is the future of their children and their cost of living. And you think, but But this is tied into it. When we are spending billions on dealing with this issue, when in terms of our quality of life is massively impacted by crime and by fear of sexual assault for our young women and our girls, and when we talk about the changing culture of our country, that's mass legal as well as illegal immigration. I mean, one thing he was right about was that actually a lot of people have got a completely. They think there are far more illegal migrants than there are actually legal migrants. People tend not to get the figures. They don't really understand actually. But the legal migration is off the scale as well, and people are concerned about that. But why anybody would think it was controversial to detain and remove people who have no right to be in this country just absolutely flabbergasts me. I mean, there's not a bit of this policy that I don't go, yeah. And you know as well as I do, and audience knows, well, I've not agreed with the policy that Nigel Farage has announced with us on human rights, whether it's about women being housed with male prisoners and things. I call them out, I do it publicly, I do it to their face every single time. There is not a single word of this that I have seen so far that I could disagree with. And frankly, if it cost 20 billion, it's still worth doing. Criminal justice, protecting our borders costs money. I think people would rather that it costs more. I don't think it will. They would rather it cost more if it could protect our borders. But at the end of the day, this is similar to the Australian policy that did work, not the Rwanda policy that was that wouldn't have worked because it was on a scale of, it was just a couple of hundred people. It's got to be very, very simple. You come to this country, you are never going to be walking the streets. You're never going to go and get your little black market job. You're never going to be free. You're not going to be able to bring your family here. You're not going to be able to stay here. You're going to be shipped out. You don't want to go back to your home country? Fine. Then you're going to be in Rwanda or Albania or the Ascension Islands or anywhere else. I mean, not our problem. And when Nigel Farage was asked, what about people who, could face torture or reprisals in their home countries? And he said, well, I think it's where the British people are now. I think the rest of the world's problems are not our problem. We need to be concerned about people in our country. But again, you can easily solve that by saying, right, we'll take you somewhere else, to a third country. But you ain't staying here. I think within a week, that message would get across. And within a week, those boats would stop. There would be no market to come to this country anymore. Full stop.
And that's something that you've certainly seen in America, where you have, first of all, a set of policies introduced, but also just the message really being clearly sent out that asylum, but really just asylum as a cover for illegal migration, will just not be tolerated. And that definitely has an effect. I also think from, talking about the kind of pro-refugee usual suspects who have been out on the airwaves this morning, I really think they have to wake up and smell the coffee. People's attitudes are really hardening, and this is not because they're terrible people, it's because of the fact that they've seen that their country is being exploited, that you've got a lot of people staring into the middle distance and talking about our responsibilities under refugee conventions and so on, when we all know that this has just become, in no small part, the degree to which we can argue about, a channel for illegal migration, and quite a dangerous one, insofar as if you don't know who these people are, predominantly men as we know, then you don't know how many
not all
of
women
them,
and children. That's what the Treasury told us.
You don't know how many of them might be fleeing charges in other countries, how many of them might be a threat to the public. So the public have woken up to that. If we want to carve out an immigration policy and an asylum policy, which is, yes, humane, but also sane, you need to get a grip on the border. Otherwise, you will never have any public buy-in.
Well, you're not a country without a grip on the border.
You're not. It's essentially not enforcing your own laws as well. It becomes incredibly corrosive. And I think if we need the fact that all of Europe is looking at this issue afresh. Left-wing governments, right-wing governments, centrist governments, they've all realised.
The German Chancellor is getting very hardline on this stuff because he knows it's him or the AFD. I mean, I don't know why Keir Starmer doesn't get this, because he fundamentally doesn't think there's anything wrong with people coming into this country illegally. He really, really doesn't think that's a problem. He's playing along with it. I get that a lot of my voters might think that, but he doesn't really think it.
And I think some of the smarter politicians as well have realised that not only do they have to do this because it's being demanded of them democratically, but also that what we've ended up with, the status quo, is morally reprehensible. It seems to fail everyone from top to bottom. It's incentivising people to pay people smuggling gangs insane amounts of money. It's leading people to...
No, it's come down in price. The market's worked wonderfully. It's only 1,500 quid to get across now. It used to be £5,000.
It's amazing.
Free market capitalism is an amazing thing.
When you allow those forces to be unleashed. But yes, it's one of those things where it's quite clear that we've created a system in which if someone is willing to risk their lives crossing the Mediterranean and the English Channel, lining the pockets of some of the worst people imaginable in the process to end up with their chance to languish in a hotel and make a meagre wage, doing Deliveroo illegally. Does anyone think this is a wonderful, positive success story?
But for those people from their basket case countries, this is a good thing. And a lot of these young men, by the way, are fleeing conscription in their countries, often in civil wars. And I'm really sorry you were born in a basket case country. Well, but again, I'm with Nigel Farage. I'm just not sure it's my problem.
But also, I'm talking about even in terms of this country. Like we talk about, there are certain situations where immigration can be a real boon in terms of certain industries that need to be built up, so on and so forth. There's all kinds of success stories you could point to. From our country's perspective, this is not one of them. I think that should be obvious to anyone at this point.
Absolutely. I want to hear from you. Unsurprisingly, I do want to know what you think. Maybe we're going to get more detail. There are going to be lots of questions from the sort of the hand-wringing media today about this controversial policy of booting illegal people out of the country. I mean, mind-blowing. Particularly also replacing the Human Rights Act with the British Bill of Rights. Are you worried about the cost? Because that's the papers are. The Tories and the Labour, they're worried about the cost. Yeah, because the cost is the issue, really, as if the cost of what we're dealing with now isn't the real issue. Give us a call. I'd love to hear your thoughts about Nigel Farage's plan for the detention and mass deportation of illegal migrants, replacing the Human Rights Act with the British Bill of Rights, all of that. Love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to get in touch. Text the word TALK in your message to 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1 standard network rate. Message. Really can't wait to get your calls on air. We didn't touch very much on there, but the scrapping of the Human Rights Act, which has been outrageously, people say it's different interpretations. It's been misinterpreted. I always say there are two paragraphs to Article 8, the right to a family life and to privacy. They ignore the second paragraph. Leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, just look, if that's what's going to stop us from deporting people, then so be it. Derogating from the Refugee Convention, again, from a very different time, the 1950s, I think, just from a very different time when we're talking about a small number of people. We're now looking at millions of people. It no longer works. But crucially, replacing all of this with the British Bill of Rights, and in particular, we think a sort of a First Amendment style right to the absolute right to the freedom of speech, similar to America, where unless there is clear evidence of a direct and deliberate attempt to incite specific acts of violence against someone or something, you have the right to say what you want. I mean, that surely is something we should be fighting for.
No, absolutely, because we've just completely warped our own tradition of freedom of speech in this country. We've kind of replaced the liberties that we used to have with these kind of European style rights, which are heavily caveated, which are ultimately adjudicated by a foreign court, which are completely outside of our own kind of specific tradition of liberty, of toleration, of live and let live. So actually the kind of starting of a conversation towards restoring a lot of the approach that we used to have in this country would be very welcome. I think we're seeing with a lot of the speech policing cases, which are generating a lot of interest in the US, Lucy Connolly, etc.
Yeah.
I think the more kind of Anglophile Americans, I should say, have noted that we've really drifted quite far apart from the kind of tradition we gave them, if that makes sense. So I think not only this question about migration lends itself ultimately to the question about what do rights mean in this country, because as we all know, they've become a kind of perversion of what they should have been in the first place.
I mean that's the thing. I mean we've had awful scenes of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance criticising our record on freedom of speech in recent years. We had the release of Lucy Connolly from prison, of course, last week. I don't think she should be the poster child, though. I've got to be honest with you. I love my dear old friend Alison Pearson, her interview with Lucy Connolly after release. She should never have gone to prison. I don't think she should have been convicted of a crime. But I don't think she's the poster child for where we want to go. But then I suppose, defending people's right to post horrible things is kind of the essence of freedom of speech, isn't it?
No, exactly. I think there's a distinction between saying that she should never have been in prison, that it was absolutely abhorrent that not only was she to be convicted, but to given such a hefty sentence. I mean, all of this...
More than some people who actually committed arrests. I mean, at the time, I supported her being in prison because I believed the reports where the police had actually the police, I mean, she's one of sort of apology effectively from the police in terms of they completely distorted what she'd said to them in her interviews.
Yeah, and they later had to correct their own press release about what it is that she'd allegedly said to them.
I made a judgment on her based on what I knew, which was what was publicly put out. I didn't know that some of that was lies, and I was wrong.
But as you say, you don't have to like the individual in question, support the individual in question, agree with the individual in question to defend their rights. And I think that's also. And
especially after Vicky Jones, the Labour councillor, who around the same time is on camera. It's not like, oh, didn't he say it? On camera in front of a large group of people, calling on people to slit the throats of, the fascists, the far right. I mean, literally, and using the finger. Now, a jury chose to get him off for that. Now, Lucy Connolly should have gone to a jury. She should absolutely have pleaded. We understand why she didn't, because she thinks she'd be waiting a year, 2 years. It wouldn't have been 2 years, but it could have waited a year for a trial. And she wanted to get back to her child and thought she'd serve less. I think that's what a lot of people would do. But she, it is fascinating that a jury would let him off when, I mean, he was, in my view, feel free to sue, Ricky, he was clearly inciting violence. A large group of people very, right in front of him, and calling people to slit people's throats. I just don't think people should go around saying stuff like that. I don't consider that to be protected speech.
Well, I think even where incitement is concerned, this isn't necessarily the law in this country, but I think what the standard should be is a more kind of US style, which is that you really tightly define it to speech which is likely and intended to cause the violence.
I thought that was likely and intended.
Because I think
it wasn't a figure of speech.
Well, because there's also the question where incitement is concerned, and this bears to the Lucy Connolly case as well, although that was on social media rather than in person, is sometimes people just come out and say things that they instantly regret. And I think I could easily see a situation in which both that tweet and that speech fell into that category.
Well, she'd already deleted her tweet long before the police got involved.
And incidentally, Ricky Jones, apparently, when he put out the video of his speech on social media later, he made a point of removing that section. Whether that's back covering or whether that's actual regret, we don't know. But I think people can just have an outburst. That's not to justify it. That's not to say.
I think you can have an outburst, but I think afterwards to say, look, I said something, I shouldn't have said it, and I'm wrong to have said it, and I apologise for that. Yeah, I'm not a fan of just let's just gratuitously punish people for people saying the wrong thing. But but I find it extraordinary that the jury made that decision. But I think it's very interesting that it does tell us quite a big message about actually the British people when asked to judge on these things pretty much think that people should be allowed to say what they want to say. Just one final thing, we're talking of crimes, whether it's a crime or not. Latest figures. Well, these are figures from 8 p.m. last night. I find it hard to believe there have not been arrests since then, but 423 people arrested at the Notting Hill Carnival, according to the Metropolitan Police. 2 stabbings. So, well, no one's died. Well done, everybody. Now, look, about 1 million people attend this carnival. We had 2 people dying last year, more stabbings. And people are saying, look, actually, this is less serious violence, largely peaceful. Of course it's largely peaceful. It is. I've been to Notting Hill Carnival, many years ago, when I was younger. But if you look at, say, like Glastonbury Festival, 5 days, lots of people go for 6 or 7, 210,000 people attending. There were 31 arrests. No one stabbed. 31 arrests over all that time. And you think, it's older people. It's it's not in such a built-up area. It's ticketed. But I don't know of any other event where this is considered to be a good news story, that there were only 2 stabbings and only 423 arrests, which is how it's being played. I don't think that's a good news story.
Well, cool. And the fact that you have kind of repeated stabbings, acts of violence at any particular event, obviously that should be called into question. I suppose the question is there something about the way in which the event is held now, because of the fact that or continues to be held rather, because of the fact that it's so open, because of the fact that it's in a built-up area, that this therefore makes it, given the scale of it, impossible to police effectively? Or is it the fact, and I suspect this is the case at least to a certain degree, is that the police are wary of policing it to the extent that might actually make people more safe because of the fact there is a kind of cultural sensitivity there, or not wanting to be seen.
I haven't seen any videos of dancing coppers this year, so that's at least something. They're actually doing their job.
But that's the question that needs to be answered.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I want it to carry on by all means. But I tell you what, though, I love all the people who actually love the fact you've got the Jamaican flag being flown. I mean, it's lovely. Although we drove past yesterday on the way back from the airport, massive load of Palestinian flags on one building. I thought, is it a Palestinian festival? I thought it wasn't. Celebration of Caribbean culture. But, you know, the same people who go, oh, look at that. They love a Palestinian flag. They love a Jamaican flag. Someone putting up an England flag. Beyond the pale. Why on earth are people putting flags up? By the way, these people have the Ukraine flag, a trans flag, an NHS thing, and an EU flag in their ex-bio every single time. The two, not just two-tiered justice, the two-tier hypocritical nonsense we get spouted from these people is amazing.